and I do need to look it up again. But I think you're right. My grandmother's history, my father's mother, being born and raised as a Japanese woman, and finding out that she's Korean when she's 19 years old. I mean, that's just remarkable. And to have to go back to Jeju Island and understand herself and her world. And then, going back to mainland, she's been through several massacres, several wars, through immigration, and to landing in California and sort of taking care of her granddaughter, which was me, and us having Japanese between us. I've always felt especially close to my grandmother. She was my only living grandparent, and so she took care of me quite a bit. But yes, thank you for, saying all of that and asking about her.
Yeah, and the similarity in the names, I just wondered if there was a relationship between Kumiko and Fumiko, which was just a curiosity. Aside from your entree into poetry, for which we're very grateful, because your work is really a blessing to this world and to a deeper, nuanced sense about living life, I think you had another major pivot point that came out in your book, and that was when one of your other mentors made the connection between the 49 letters that you had left from your mother and the 49 days. Now, even though you grew up in a Catholic family, the Buddhist concept of bardo, the 49 days where a soul who dies wanders, sort of finishing up things on earth before deciding where the soul goes on to live afterwards, which made the realization for you that dealing with your mother's letters was part of your life work.
Yes, it was an important time because I just found the letters, and I had no intention of having become a translator and poet at that time. I was translating them. It just never occurred to me what in hindsight would be so obvious. So I met this wonderful poet and translator, Domini Choi, in Seattle here. And she told me that 49 is the number of days that your soul wanders the earth looking for answers before the afterlife. And I think a part of that told me not only that this was my work, but that this is where I should go if I have questions. This is where I might be a little closer to any answers that I was hoping for. And it started several years of my work in translating my mother's letters.
Yeah, it's amazing. And of course, coming full circle between being left on your own with your years older brother, through the letters, then you mentioned this concept of magnanimity and forgiveness, which you were then able to see what your mother had gone through, as well as match it with what you had gone through. And I thought it was interesting. It was your brother that brought it up first, but later you also felt that you hadn't been sort of stuck, but you were actually liberated by having this separation, because ultimately it led you to the voice you have now. Does that ring true still?
Yeah, I think so. Towards the end of my translation work for my mother's letters, I remember I was at a fellowship and somebody brought a very valid point to me that was, your parents abandoned you. And, this person also had daughters, and they said, I can't ever imagine leaving my kids behind. And I think what's important to say here is that in Korean culture and in many cultures, it's more important to pay for your family than to be with them. However, for me, being born and raised here and in Western culture, it's far more important to be with your children than to pay for them. And so my expectations were to have my parents with me, and that's what caused a lot of the pain and suffering. And their expectations were just to make sure that our family could continue having the financial support they wanted us to have. And so I find that, if you asked my parents, I don't think they would regret any of the choices they've made. And I don't think I do either. I went through a lot of bad choices, but each of those steps brought me to a closer place within myself, to have a relationship with me and the world that I feel is special.
Fantastic. Now, in your book, where you actually have copies of the letters that your mother sent in Korean, some of them, and then you translate them for us. You also move through different episodes in your life through to this present time. And you had one line in your book that said, "We are the answer to life's question when we are born." So I'd be curious to know, what's the question and what's the answer?
It's so interesting. I think it's more of a statement of meditation. I meditate quite a bit, an hour in the morning and evening, and so these sort of lines come to me, but they don't come from sort of a reductive and something that can be derived into what is the question and what is the answer, but more of a meditation on, if each of our lives are created and born to answer a question, what would that question be? And for me, it was an important way to think about it, because so much of my life has been about looking for answers, when in fact it seems like the answers are not so important as much as the question, and the questions that are continued, that one can continue to ask. So that was a little bit about that.
Fantastic. Yes. Well, and I know when you write books, of course, it's a work in progress, incubating for quite some time, and just to pull one single line out is kind of unfair to throw at you. But you did also say that you felt incoherent in every language, English, Korean, and Japanese, but poetry was different. It never asked you to be correct, practiced, or recognized. Poetry was never one thing to anybody, and it must have been the only way to speak for and as myself. And we're so lucky that you found your voice through poetry, that you've shared your life and this deep message of connection, of I think the work you're doing in Han with generational trauma is so needed in this world today, and I'm so grateful you're doing that. And any final words, and then let people know how they can get a hold of you if they want to make contact.
Oh, sure. A few years ago, I started a project where I write 1,000 love letters to strangers. And this week I sent love letter number 176. But it's something I continue to do. And my email is on my website. This is E.J.Koh.com. And if you want a love letter, you just let me know a little bit about yourself or a struggle, and I'll handwrite and post a love letter to you.
Wow. Yeah. And I know ultimately you said that your whole journey has been basically a practice of joy and a journey back to love. And so here you are now passing on this greater love very personally through your letter campaign. So thank you for that. Her email again is E.J.Koh.com. And you can find the email there where you can request your love letter. Well, thank you, E.J. I'm so delighted to meet you. We're thrilled about your book, The Magical Language of Others. And we look forward to hearing more of you and from you immediately at the Miami Book Fair coming up in November, but also onward and upward, because You are a deep, rich source of love, joy, and insight that our world so desperately needs now. So thank you for sharing just a little bit of yourself with us today.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you for chatting with me and for your insightful questions and giving me a chance to do a little more digging and get a chance to talk to you. So thank you.
My pleasure. All right. Well, thank you to E.J.Koh, and thank you to our listeners as well, and my producer, Joe. Do tune in to the SOBRadionetwork.com, and you can look up our show, Living Legacy Leadership, and notice the past archives. And hope you'll tune in with us next week. And also check out my website, GameChangerThinking.com. So as we wrap up, then let me just remind you that the life you live is the legacy you leave. Bye-bye now. 안녕히 가세요.